Hey everybody, welcome back. Today I'm going to react to my album Intermezzo, which was my second album. We recorded this in the summer of '95 and it was released in January of 1996. It was kind of a big budget project for me at the time. So once again, we're just going to jump right in. And this is the opening track called The Black Cottage. Yeah, I love these sounds, these opening sounds. This was supposed to be like the sound of incense smoke rising up into the air. And I love this like nice long intro. And right away, this album sounds very different from The Mask of Memory. It's very dark and gothic and neoclassical sounding. Oh yeah. This big crescendo before the cello enters. Nice. And this is cellist Eric Stein playing this here. He had answered an ad that I put up at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music and came over to my house and we really hit it off. And I remember it was such a thrill for me to hear this music played on a real cello, you know, because before I met Eric, I was just using like a synthesizer sound. Okay, so this is now Unharvested, which again, it starts with these really cool, weird sounds. And most of the sounds on this album were created using a synthesizer called the Korg Wave Station, which was pretty new for me at the time. And what I wanted to create with this opening of this track was to create the feeling of sitting on a cliff, looking out over the ocean, and then getting up and walking along the shore. And here we are walking along the shore. And I love this string pads there. It's very pretty. And then there's this beautiful piano melody coming in here, nice. And you know what's interesting about this album? There's such interesting chord changes, like that one right there, that on the whole album, it has this track to me has almost like an Eric Satie or a Gabriel Fauré feeling to it. Yeah, and this track was played on Hearts of Space back in early 1996. It was right after the album was released. It was on a show called Northern Lights 3. Yeah, this track, Blood of the Raven, is one of my favorites. There's so many layers to it, and those layers are constantly changing and evolving over the full 8-minute track. So whereas, Unharvested, we were walking along the shore, now we're almost running along the shore and perhaps even flying. Just sort of this idea of like being able to take wing with Raven flying along on the shoreline. And this track got a lot of airplay on Echoes that year. And Eric and I performed on a living room concert on Echoes. A couple months after the album came out, we recorded it at my apartment in Oakland with John DiLiberto, and it was broadcast a couple months later. Yeah, and this album ended up being very successful for me. It got lots of airplay, and I remember I was able to get it distributed to Tower record stores all around the country. This is just such a great energy, this track. And again, really, really cool sounds. I was really into sound design on this album, I remember. And this is essentially the title track of the album. This is actually called Intermezzo, the space between. So it's the resting place between beginning and end. And again, a lot of really cool sounds. And then there's this lonely piano echoing into the darkness. And the title, The Space Between, it was taken from a lyric by the band Rush, from their song Between Sun and Moon. And the line is, the space between actor and act, the silence between wishes and fact. Oh yeah, chamber doors. Yeah. Now I think Eric Stein really nails the performance here on this track. It's a very tricky piece to play correctly, and because it's so exposed, and there's these really tricky arpeggios that come up a little bit later here. There's some nice reverb on there. That's interesting. This kind of reminds me a little bit of John Tavener. Like there's that piece, The Protecting Veil by John Tavener, which was performed by Stephen Isserlis on the cello back at that time. Definitely some influence there. Oh yeah, okay, and then this section here, after the cello introduction, there's this duet between the cello and the synthesizer, and this was actually played live in the studio together. So Eric and I sat out in the live room together and played this live. We recorded this album at Different Fur Studio in San Francisco with engineer Howard Johnson, who had worked with people like Brian Eno and George Winston, like right there in that studio. So that was a really fun place to work in. So this is the sort of the high point of the album, and it starts with these echoing bells. This kind of reminds me of Klaus Schulze, reminds me about quite a bit of Mirage, which I'm sure I was influenced by. And again, there's like really, really beautiful sounds here. And then the piece kind of builds and builds and builds and builds up to this big, the big crescendo. Right? This huge climax with this big swell. It's so cool. And then there's this kind of long disintegration that happens, and then we're left with this lonely cello solo that kind of finishes up the piece here at the very end. Oh, it's just exquisite playing. Eric really nailed it on this record. All right, and finally we have the final track, Acquainted with the Night. And here we're back to just piano with some really cool cello sounds that kind of echo in the background. This was really fun to record. I remember I had Eric out in the live room, and we just tried out like every weird noise you could make on a cello. So there's tremolos, and then there are these like bending pizzicato. And then it ends with him tapping the back of the bow on the strings. And that's actually kind of one of the last sounds you hear. It's really cool. The way this album ends is really neat. It's like this gradual disintegration, and then you're just left with nothing but like a void at the very end. Ooh, gives me chills. That's really creepy. That's really cool. All right, well, that was Intermezzo. Wow. That's a wild journey, that record. Yeah, that was fun. I also want to say hats off to Werner Krutine, who was the artist who created the cover image. I wanted the cover to look like a church window, like a window into the universe or the window into the soul. And Vern created this image. It was largely computer generated from a fractal equation. And then Vern added in rocks from the wall of the Parthenon, and then all these little hand-drawn little galaxies and stars that are back in the window. And there's just so much detail in the image here. And there's just so many things that it can be when you look at it. It's like some people think it looks like the mouth of a snake or like a glowing monk. Either way, I mean, it's really surreal, and I think it goes so perfectly well with the music. Well, that was fun. So that was Intermezzo, and I hope you enjoyed coming along with me on that. And next month we'll dive into Pendulum. Okay, bye.